Matt and Buffy Payne are a couple driven by purpose. Through their nonprofit, Outer Circle Foundation, and faith-based organizations like Few and Dudes, their mission is clear: to spark positive change, empower others, and build a better world, one connection at a time. She is Chick. He is Dude. Welcome to the Chicken Dude Stuff Podcast.
So Chicken Dude Stuff Podcast. We are very, very fortunate to have Mary Swisher with us, who is an active law enforcement officer over in East Georgia. So welcome, Mary. How are you?
Thanks.
Why don't you tell everybody kind of who is Mary?
Well, I am just a normal, average human being. I live in Metro Atlanta. I am a detective for a small city police department on the east side of Atlanta. I grew up in Stone Mountain, Georgia. My dad was retired Coast Guard. My family originated from Miami, Florida.
How long have you been in law enforcement?
Since the 1900s.
Since the next.
I started in the mid-90s with Gwinnett County Police Department as an animal control officer.
Okay.
We were part of the police department. From there, I went up to Forsyth County doing the entire county animal control by myself, and I went through the police academy with them. Then I got married, moved to Alabama, became a fingerprint examiner. At one time, I was the humane educator for their animal services. Then, as much as I didn't want to come back to Metro Atlanta, God thought that I needed to, so here I am.
So it's interesting, Mary, I don't know if you know, but I retired as the chief humane law enforcement officer for all of New Jersey. That was my last job.
I did not know that.
Yeah, that's where I retired as the chief. So we had about 65 or so on our department. 30 were sworn and carried. 30 were agents that could go out and just do regular investigations and write the non-serious complaints, right? They can do the local stuff. And then
like the code enforcements.
Yep. And then they got us from the law enforcement side. If it needed, bigger investigation, we did all dogfighting, cockfighting, then everything in between at that point in time. So that's interesting.
And that's how I started. And then I had a couple incidences where it would behoove me to have been certified.
Yep.
So the department sent me through the academy, at which point then I could write my own search warrants, my own arrest warrants.
Yep.
And I helped teach them about the fighting. You're absolutely right. When you have animal fighting, that is the bottom of the barrel to all the additional felonies: illegal gambling, prostitution, drugs for the animals, drugs for the people, all of the things.
Yeah. And then how long have you shifted over into what I call people law enforcement? When did you make that shift?
Well, when I went to Alabama and I got married, I was in Huntsville, the city of Huntsville, North Alabama. And there I was the humane educator for the animal services for about 5 years. And then I transferred over to the police department where I became a fingerprint examiner.
Mm-hmm.
So I got full-time heavy duty into people policing. When I came back to Georgia, it was very easy to walk into policing because I was already sworn.
Yeah.
I already had all my credentials. I needed a little catching up for working on the street.
Yeah.
And then I had the opportunity to move into criminal investigation division. I'm much too old to be fighting with those 22-something-year-olds on the street.
Right.
Rather use my brain than my brawn.
Yeah. Yep. So did you grow up in Miami? You had referenced your family came from Miami, or did you grow up in Georgia?
I grew up here in Stone Mountain.
Okay.
When my dad retired in 1977. So
Okay.
I was young then.
Yep.
So I grew up here. The family didn't want to go back to Florida, but wanted to be close enough to additional family.
Yeah.
So this was where they settled.
And what did your dad do in the Coast Guard? Do you know?
I have no idea.
Okay. Right.
I do know that at some point he worked communications, because I think in fourth grade I did like a Morse code presentation for class, and he helped me with that.
Right. And it was a full career for him. He was full-time, like Coast Guard,
Yes.
his entire career.
Yes. He started as a Marine. He did 4 years in the Marines, and then he transferred over to the Coast Guard. But the story I grew up was he was a pirate and he got caught, and they said either go to jail or go into the military.
That story's way better.
That's what I thought.
That's interesting.
That's funny.
And do you know when he retired? Did you say 77 is when he retired?
Yes.
Okay. So you were young. So you weren't moving around base to base and all that as like what we call a military brat.
Yeah.
Right. I was born in Hawaii. Then he got transferred to Long Beach in California, and that was when he retired. So,
Gotcha. Okay.
yeah, I wasn't one of those jumping around a whole lot.
Yeah. Interesting. And, was there any other law enforcement in your family? Like how did that happen for you? How did you work your way into that?
It's funny that you mentioned that, because when I was young, I wanted to either be a veterinarian or a homicide investigator.
Okay.
But I never really had any guidance on how to follow the track of interest for careers.
Mhm.
So I kind of floated. At one time, I wanted to be a teacher, a high school teacher. Then I substituted and fixed that real fast. And I saw the animal control position, and I thought, I love animals. It would be great to do that. I've umpired also. So, I like to keep things straight and steady, if that makes any sense.
Okay.
So, yeah, God made it happen.
And right so walk me through. So you graduate high school. Did you go to college right away? Did you start working right away? What transpired there?
It's funny that you mentioned that specifically, because that plays into part of my lifetime of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
I was raised in a strict Catholic household.
Okay.
We went to mass every week. We went to CCD. I actually graduated from St. Pius High School in 1988.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the 2 Catholic high schools in Atlanta at that time. And I went off to college. When I graduated, I went up to a little town called Steubenville, Ohio, which hardly anybody has ever heard of, but it has the Franciscan University of Steubenville, which is a Catholic college. And I came home pregnant and unmarried and was the scourge of the family.
Okay.
So from there, I did get my associate's degree at the local DeKalb Community College. And after that, I was kind of done with school. Unbeknownst, I had undiagnosed ADHD. So getting into that focus mode that's necessary for schoolwork was always very difficult for me.
Right.
And, I was, during that time frame, I had started drinking when I was 18. By the time I was 21, I realized that I had a serious problem. So I did get sober. I've been sober for 33 years. I like personal growth. I like trying to be a better person. I always have. And when I was drinking, I had to have a long talk with myself and say, I don't like who I'm becoming.
Right.
And I knew that part of that was a trauma response in muting the feelings and hiding from the feelings and trying not to feel things. So there was all of that. Got married, got divorced, got into law enforcement.
brothers and sisters growing up?
I had two older brothers. And as I had mentioned briefly, my life kind of started in trauma. My very first memories are when I was 3 years old, and my 6-year-old brother was hit by a car and killed.
Oh,
So I remember the hospital in the ER room, and I remember being carried down the center aisle at the funeral home to see my brother in the casket. And I kept telling him to wake up, and my mom said, he's not going to wake up. And it wasn't even anything that I felt traumatized by. It was just my first memory. I don't have any additional memories until really about 6, 7 years old. And I used to think that I had sort of made it up. But then I talked with my mom, and she said, no, that's exactly what happened. And there was that formative trauma in my world and between my parents and my brother. My older brother was 5 years older than me, and they were together. They were walking home from the library. They were in the crosswalk, and my brother was hit by a car driven by our babysitter. And it was just a young driver and an accident, and just kind of how life went.
yeah. Wow. Wow. Yeah, that's always a very rough part, especially when you're that young and don't really know how to process it and don't really know what happened. And my sister was about that old when my dad was killed in Vietnam. I was 2 months, she was 3 years. And, she still struggles to remember because there's pictures I post every year for the day he was killed and then Memorial Day. And there's a picture of her standing on a step and him sitting with her. And like they're in the middle of a conversation. And like she can't remember any of that or anything. So she really struggles with that piece of things as well.
When I was younger, I would mention the fact that I had a brother that was killed, and people would always offer their sympathy. And at the time I said, well, thanks. It doesn't really matter to me because I didn't know him.
Right.
But then you grow up and you learn what you have missed.
Yeah.
He wasn't there at my wedding. I will never be an aunt to his children. All those things.
Yeah. Are you close to your older brother?
No. My older brother is a convicted felon who is currently sitting in jail, waiting for additional felony charges. And I believe that a lot of his problems were born out of self-medicating to the trauma that he's dealt with.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially being there and being the older brother and not being able to protect and not being able to do and survivor's guilt. And there's so much that goes along with that in the trauma world that, kind of fits that mold, if you will.
Right. And my family didn't talk about Mark after Mark was killed. My mom told me later that she would want to talk about Mark. She loved to talk about Mark. She wanted to keep him alive. My dad wanted to pretend that Mark never existed, and my brother would just start crying. Yeah. So the topic of my dead brother was just off the table.
Yeah. Yeah.
Avoidance.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and that's part of it as well, right? Is that there's avoidance and withdrawal, and it never happened, and how are we gonna kind of make this go away, kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah. So with your career, out of kind of some of those things that you've done and where you've been, do certain cases and things stand out more than others to you from that regard?
Absolutely. And some of it has changed over the years. I remember when I first got into law enforcement, I really did not have a lot of compassion for domestic violence victims. I was like, just leave, just get out. Why do you keep going back? Why do you keep bailing them out? Why don't you press charges? All those things. And I was married to two abusers. They did not blacken my eyes, but they burned my soul. Financial abuse, spiritual abuse, psychological abuse, verbal abuse, all the things that aren't criminal. And I didn't recognize them for what they were until I got out. So I really have a heart for domestic violence victims and any sort of abused people, children. I have recently gotten onto the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. It is a federal task force that is, each state then is a subsidiary. So I am the officer for the city of Stone Mountain, who is on the Georgia ICAC task force. And last week I had my first arrest. So it's satisfying knowing that I can help get these abusers off the street, but it's also heartbreaking when you see the children and they are literally just a data file that you can't help in person.
There's a lot of people that look at, human trafficking and crimes against children, and they think, oh, that's all Thailand, that's the Philippines, that's, all of these areas out there. And I believe if I saw something, the United States is like in the top three, from the aspect of numbers and where we lie in that space.
Well, one of the things that I have learned on the task force is the United States is not the primary producer of child sexual abuse material, but we are the primary consumer.
Mary, I have a heart for domestic violence too. So that's a passion of mine and has been for many years. Yeah. I used to think the same way. I used to think, why don't women just leave, until I was in a relationship like that. And it's not so easy to just leave.
No, and the abuse is covert and insidious. And I compare it often to back in the 70s and 80s when we had all the violent cartoons. Somebody would show up with a sword and they would, and then the other person would stand there until finally they would just fall apart. And that's sort of what I felt like when I left the last marriage. Was we were married, living as a married couple for 11 years. And then it was a 2-year battle. And it wasn't until I was away that I could see the damage that he had caused. And it's, I think part of it is the fact that those particular types of abuse are not criminal. I didn't have any black eyes. He didn't choke me. He didn't kick me. He didn't throw me through a plate glass window. But I knew that I had to check in where I went, and our financial communications weren't just respectful, hey, this is what I'm going to spend. It was seeking permission, things like that. And the trauma bond is real.
It's hard for women that are in it to identify it.
And gaslighting.
Yeah.
And dog whistling and flying monkeys,
Mm-hmm.
all the little terms for what happens that nobody else can see.
And then there's always that hope or that belief that it's going to get better because he apologized or because he did something to make it a little better. And
you think you can love them enough into behaving.
Yeah, I don't really have a whole lot on that. I don't, and I'm not, it's not anything laughing. That's not I've always, there's there's a couple of things that just get my goat. And one, it's somebody who picks on a woman, picks on the elderly, picks on a child, or picks on an animal. And,
The helpless.
those that, and there's plenty of women out there that can handle their own, but there's plenty of women out there that, like Buff said, just don't realize it until they realize it. And at some point in time, it's almost, I wouldn't say too late, but they just don't know how to get out of it or be kind of who they were at that point in time. It strips everything away, I guess, is the way I would kind of describe it.
You lose your identity
Yeah.
for a bit. You have to work hard to find yourself again.
Yeah.
And get out of it.
Yeah. So you found Outer Circle Foundation through, I believe, Brian Moore. Is that?
I did.
Okay.
I did. So, so I've had, like this basic trauma that is what we call life, stressors. When I was 16, I was in a horrendous car crash. I got a helicopter ride to Georgia Baptist. At that time, Georgia Baptist had a trauma center as well as Grady. Then when I was 17, I was robbed at gunpoint working at Del Taco, my first little job. So, there were some very acute traumas. And I processed, but it doesn't just go away. It'll leave a film or a residual effect, which is okay. It doesn't interfere, but it changes you. It changes you. Not necessarily in a bad way. Stress, we grow and we move on. But then in 2022, at this point, both my parents are dead. I'm a full-fledged grown up, living on my own, having the time of my life. Because if you remember, I had my child when I was very young. So now I'm like living the footloose and fancy-free life. And I'm working. I'm a police officer. And I had a small house fire. And I say small because it was very small. I was very blessed in that regard. But I didn't know what to do with that. Like, I can run into bullets, but I don't know what to do with a fire. I'm calling 911. I'm getting out my little fire hydrant, my fire extinguisher thing that no way could reach the fire because it was in the crawl space on the other side of the house. It never dawned on me to get the hose. There's an idea, I was out of the house for about 3 weeks, which should tell you exactly how small it was. And I was very, very blessed with the fact that it was so teeny weeny. And then a year later, I had a man come in my house at 11:30 at night. It was July 12th of 2023, and I do live alone with my dog. I was dog sitting my daughter's dog at that time also. And it was I was kind of in that twilight zone of not quite asleep, but not really awake. And I heard my screen door. I live in a 100-year-old farmhouse, and my screen door will creak when it opens and slam when it shuts. And I sat up in bed and I listened, and I thought, that's not a possum. Like, they might have opposable thumbs, but they're not opening my screen door. And I heard my doorknob jiggle. And I thought, what the heck? So, being a cop, I grabbed my bed gun and flashlight. And my house is small, and I keep ambient lights on, in the kitchen. So I let my German Shepherd out the back door, and I went out the front door. There's nothing on my porch, and I'm looking, checking out what's going on. And all of a sudden I heard my dog bark from inside my house. A dog does not have opposable thumbs.
Yeah.
So I opened my front door with my flashlight and my gun, and there is a man standing in my kitchen within arm's reach of my duty weapon. Because again, I live alone. I walk in, most of the time I just throw my gun down on the kitchen island and go about my life.
Yep.
And there he was. I ordered him to the ground to a prone position. The first thing I said as he's staring into my flashlight, he heard a voice that said, "I have a gun and I will shoot you.
Yep.
Do not move."
Mhm.
And I will say, I was super sexy in my pajamas, by the way.
So let's peel it back a little bit. So your duty weapon on the counter, is it a level 2 or 3 holster, or is it just a pull out and he's got your gun?
That was a level 2 retention.
Okay.
So it had the friction, plus it had a manual lock release,
Okay.
which is what I carry as a detective.
Yeah.
My gun duty belt is a level 3.
Yeah. But my point is, even if you would have gone for it, right, there's some time frame in there for you, because in your head, I'm sure you're running through a million different things while you're looking at this guy, trying to figure out what's he going to do, what's his agenda, and how am I going to handle this? And this was on the very first call that you and I spoke about, was this conversation was where we were, way back then, when after you and I touched base on things. So we spent a lot of time kind of talking about this, back then.
This was the event that filled my cup overflowing to what I could handle.
Yeah. Yep.
I have a lot of work stories, that I will never forget.
Yep.
And one of the things with this particular incident was it went smooth as silk. Like,
Yep.
I went straight into my training. He did everything that I told him to. I proned him out on the floor. I called a back line to dispatch, because I didn't want to have to deal with a call taker. I knew I would get a supervisor,
Yep.
and I said, "This is Detective Swisher with this police department. I have a man at gunpoint in my kitchen."
Mm-hmm.
And she said, "Well, do you know him?" And I said, "No, never before in my life."
This is not how I invite folks over for dinner.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Well, DeKalb County responded, and they got there, they handcuffed him. And after that, I was like, "We're good."
Did you ever figure out who he was, and kind of, was it a robbery? What did he ever mention what the gig was?
We do believe that he was suffering from mental illness.
Okay.
Based on my training and experience, I would say that he was intoxicated on alcohol,
Mm-hmm.
based on the odor of an alcoholic beverage.
Yeah.
His speech was slurred. He had no phone, no ID, absolutely nothing on his person except a key. His story was he had a key to my house and he was coming to return it. Now, the part about this is, to get to my house, you have to go to the very end of a side street in a neighborhood, go down approximately 100+ yard dirt gravel driveway. He passed a marked patrol car, a blue line flag, walked around my house, and walked in my back door.
Very bizarre.
Yeah.
Very bizarre.
Was he local? Local guy?
Yes. He apparently grew up and graduated from Tucker High School, which is another small city in Metro Atlanta nearby. But he also lied at the time. He gave an address where he said he was staying that was in the subdivision, but that address doesn't exist. He mentioned a name of a female he said, gave him the key, which I don't know this person, and the key didn't fit my house.
Yeah. So what happens after all of this goes through? And you had mentioned, right, this is kind of what broke the camel's back, ran your cup over, kind of did what? Walk us through what happens from there. What transpires?
One of my very dear closest family members is a psychiatric nurse practitioner down in Brunswick, Georgia. And I called her the next day. I told her what happened, and she was just like, "Oh, are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm fine. So I'm a little jumpy, but I'm fine." And she was like, "I'm not too sure about that, but okay." And the next day, she called me and to check on me, and I said, "I'm okay, I guess." And then the third day, I called her and said, "What the heck's wrong with me?" And she laughed at me because that's the kind of relationship that we have. And she said, "That's acute trauma response." Now, part of my own personal growth and being in law enforcement and having had the abusive relationships, I am in therapy. I believe that the therapists have the tools for us to grow. They're like a mechanic. They can do more for me than I can do for myself. So that was in place, which was amazing that I already had a relationship with a therapist, so I upped those visits. And my cousin in Brunswick, she said, well, and this was going into several months now afterwards. I'm irritable. I can't sleep. I'm doing my therapy. I'm doing EMDR. We're working the work. I'm trying to get to this point. And my therapist said, I think we've reached the point of post-traumatic stress disorder. There were days when I would have to leave work because I just was not able to deal with people and the BS of people. And to look at me, you wouldn't know that anything was wrong. I'm a little irritable. I'm not always nice. I might bite your head off. I'm not sleeping. I'm grumpy, but I'm working. I'm paying my bills. I'm doing my hobby things, which I actually wasn't. All my self-soothing and hobbies and make me happy things had really gone by the wayside. So my cousin said, "I want you to research SGB, Stellate Ganglion Blocks." I'd never heard of it. And she doesn't just tell me about things. She'll do this. She'll drop a crumb and tell me to go do some research. Mm-hmm. And I did. I learned about it and what it had been used for with post-trauma. And I couldn't find anybody in Metro Atlanta who did it or had heard about it or knew anything about it. I actually have a friend who is a nurse, anesthetist, that person.
Yeah.
And she had never heard of it. Mm-hmm. So I learned that it was primarily used for insurance purposes for pain relief, and our chief, we have a new chief. I say new, he's been there now about 3 years. He had gone to a county chiefs meeting, which they have every month. And Dr. Brian Moore was there speaking about the Ames Research Center. Well, again, God lays everything out for us to be put in place. And my partner had gone with him to that meeting, and she came back and she had a flyer. So I emailed Dr. Moore and I said, "Do you know anything about stellate ganglion blocks? Because I can't find anybody down here who does." And he said, "Let me give you a phone number to a man who will hate me forever because you will just blow up his phone at all hours of the night." And he gave me your name, Matt Payne, and Outer Circle Foundation. And, I think you've changed your number 4 times, but I keep tracking it down.
Well, it was so funny because I was in Baltimore, I think getting shots when I talked to you. So my uncle lives in between Baltimore and Annapolis, and we use Dr. Lynch, which you eventually got to. And, but I was up getting those shots and we were getting ready to walk into lunch. And we got on the call, and she knows when I get on a call, forget it. Just go in and eat and do your thing, and I'll be in eventually when I get there. And that's where we had that first really long talk. And,
Sorry, Buffy.
No, it is what it is, and
They
it's
have good crab bisque there. That was good.
yeah. She's happy. He always takes us to the best crab cakes in all of the surrounding area, and she loves the she crab soup.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a great time. We had that conversation, but then you found somebody else that was Jacksonville, I believe. Is that where you went first? Down for the SGB? Down for the
Yeah.
SGB? And how'd you find that? How'd that whole thing work out?
That worked through my cousin.
Okay.
Brunswick, Jacksonville, is just over the Florida state line. And it's kind of the biggest city to Brunswick. It's about an hour and a half away from Brunswick. So she had worked with this clinic to try to get them to start offering stellate ganglion blocks.
Mm-hmm.
And they were a little hesitant because they wanted to make sure that they, it's a big financial investment for a practice.
Yep.
And she told them, she said, I have enough clients, trust me, and they will come out because this is such a needed resource. So I went down there the first time, and that was in October. See, I wrote all this stuff down. October of 24.
Yep.
I drove down to Brunswick with my daughter, and we went to Jacksonville. I had the shot, and then we went shopping.
Only on one side, right? You got
right
one side.
Right. I had the right side done, and I felt the results almost immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Because we went shopping, and it was one of those big outdoor kind of malls. Around here in Atlanta, we call them the avenues.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I was sitting with her husband, my cousin-in-law, and we're right next to the parking area, and a car right behind us, the alarm started going off. And it was just a noise that I heard.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas before the shot, I would have come out of my skin.
Unglued. Yeah.
The, I call them the Tesla balls, but other people call them like the plasma balls, and they were real popular in the 80s with that center and then all the lines. That's what I felt like 24/7 before I had the stellate ganglion block. I was just on edge all the time with no relief in sight. And within 2 hours of having the first shot, I was responding appropriately.
Yeah. And how long did that last for you? Do you think? Ballpark.
Within 2 months, I could tell that I was back up to almost an unmanageable level. I was better than I was before,
Mm-hmm.
but I was back up to the whole irritability, the on edge, the hyper startledness.
Yeah, hypervigilance. Yep.
Right.
How was sleep in this time frame?
Oh, I didn't sleep. I hadn't slept without medication for years.
Okay. Yeah. And that's always a key component, right? Because sleep is such a key aspect of so many other things in your life that without sleep, it just magnifies everything else that you're feeling along the way.
Right. And I had been on Ambien for years. It worked for me, but it's also not a sleep medication. It's an anesthetic. And your brain doesn't process things while you sleep
Yep.
when you're on that particular medication.
Right.
And I think truly that was part of the problem. After the guy came in, I started having horrific nightmares, even while I was on the Ambien. And I started taking another medication, Prazosin, which is actually a high blood pressure medicine. But my cousin had said, try this because they have found it useful for nightmares. And it truly was for me, because I would have the nightmare, but I wouldn't have the visceral emotional response during the nightmare. So I could recognize logically while I was sleeping that these were scary thoughts and scary ideas, but I didn't have the physiological response to the dreams.
Yeah.
So somewhere my brain was trying to process things as best it could.
Yeah. Yeah.
But within from October, by the time January 2025 rolled around, I was a mess again, and your phone started blowing up again. And I knew that there was a problem when I jumped out of my shower naked and had to clear my house for intruders. And my house is less than 1,000 square feet. I knew nobody was in my house, but by golly, that's how the level of on edge and hyper awareness and hyper startling, the instinctive response system was just short circuiting off the chain.
Yeah. Because I was in an airport and I was escorting another veteran somewhere. And we had a long conversation before I got on the plane. And it was about that time, right, where it was, hey, something's not right. We got to figure this out. And then I think during that call is where I said, let's go to Dr. Lynch. And we've used Doc, and I explained to you who Doc Lynch is, but just for those that are on this podcast. So I was a combat controller at the Joint Special Operations Command. Dr. Lynch was a doctor at JSOC. And at JSOC, I kind of viewed us as professional athletes, right? So we had very one-on-one treatment with our doctors. And Doc, when the guys went out after 9/11 and started going out and being deployed and doing things, and he saw them coming back in various states, he was like, we got to do something. We got to figure this out. And he went out and started doing a ton of research. And I'm sure I'm not doing this justice to the doc standpoint, but it's kind of the way I explain it. And SGB has been around for a long, long time for rheumatoid arthritis and chronic pain and a couple of other chronic diseases that it's been used for. Doc realized that when you give it, it does a impact on and resets the fight or flight system, which alleviates those physiological symptoms of trauma. And it lets you get back to daily life and then focus on therapy or, some of the other aspects of things. And really helped. So let's go through. So you call up and you talk to either Jody or the doc, and we get those evaluation forms. I'm sure the doc sent you those and you went through those. And how did that go? What did you think about that? So was there a difference between how the doc handled things and how the place in Jacksonville handled things? Was it relatively the same?
No, there was a difference. I think most of that difference is from Dr. Lynch's experience.
Right.
This clinic in Jacksonville was a reasonably new place. They had all the right feelings and goals and motivations. They were very, very kind. They explained everything.
Right.
But Dr. Lynch also has his spirit aura, soul is very calming. And you never felt rushed when you asked his 50,000 questions, and
Yep.
he would answer them all and explain it all. And if you didn't understand it, he would explain it a different way. He'd explain it as many times in as many different ways as needed until it clicked in your brain for what you needed to hear.
Yeah.
And it was, he sent the paperwork, which I've reviewed those scores afterwards. I didn't really ask a whole lot before.
Yeah.
But he said, "Oh, yeah, I think you'd be a prime candidate.
Yeah.
When can you get here?"
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so Outer Circle handled all the details for me. I got up there and I flew up on Monday. I had my first shot Monday afternoon, had my second shot on the other side Tuesday morning, and I flew back Tuesday. I know that, that's not everybody's experience. I was comfortable with that,
Mhm.
going up and back.
Do you remember your first text message that you sent me when you came back?
No.
So your text message was, "I think my brain has just been defragged." That was your text message to me, which was absolutely classic and perfect, because that's exactly what it's supposed to do.
Yeah. And for everybody in the newer generations who don't totally know about defragmenting your computer, that was how we cleaned it all up back in the day. And it would take all those puzzle pieces and put them back in order.
Yeah.
So I could, my brain could find the things that it needed to find to work.
Yeah. And then the other thing that you told me was, I think it was the first time in, I don't know how many years, but you didn't need sleep medicine. It was
right. Yeah, I haven't used sleep medicine since.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I do my go to bed routine, and I turn off the light and I go to sleep.
And it was interesting because I think, if I'm going to summarize it correctly, you were on edge because you were waiting for the sleep not to come, but the sleep was coming, but it was almost like you were almost making the sleep an issue when the sleep, I think that we had a long conversation about that. And I was just like, you just got to give in. You just got to go.
Yeah.
Whatever happens, happens, and let it roll,
Yes, because I kept waiting to not be able to sleep again.
Right.
The second shot, one of the big things that I noticed since the original first one, for me, that double shot was very important, because the first shot sort of dampened the fight or flight system, and this one completely cut it off and allowed it to reset.
Yeah.
And with the first one, I tried not to angst it back into place, but I still had that underlying worry of, when will I not feel good again?
Yeah.
And part of that is because it had been so long that there was that chronic level of anxiety that was just part of my world, with that stress and all the traumas. And now I don't worry about that. Part of it is because I know that there's an answer. I still maintain my own work. I go to therapy. I have a therapist. I have a psychiatrist. I have a psychologist. I have all the ISTs. I do the work. I don't just sit around and wait for things to happen. But there is a huge comfort in knowing that it won't stay that way.
Yeah.
Even if I end up in a horrendous call, I don't know if y'all remember, right before Christmas, there was an active shooter on top of Stone Mountain.
Yep.
And there were 4 of us. I drove up as far as I could on the mountain, and we were the first 4 on the top of the mountain. We were running into there. And if you've ever been on top of Stone Mountain, you know that there's not any good cover.
Yeah.
Your head is going to pop over the horizon. And if somebody wants to plink it off, they're going to.
Yeah.
And so even whatever life will throw at me, I know that I don't have to be stuck in that trauma disorder.
Yeah.
You know, it's just a blessing to know that, you know, if I get hurt again, there's a remedy. There's a boo-boo fix.
Yeah. And I am not in any way, shape, or form referencing that Jacksonville was any lesser or anything. They're new, they're trying to figure it out. That's fantastic. That is a great opportunity for them to learn how to do the things. And I would encourage anybody to reach out to Dr. Lynch and drjameslynch.com. You can get him there. And he's been doing this for years and years and years, has written a ton of articles, and is what I would consider one of the premium SGB guys out there from a trauma response. And he's got people that fly in from around the world, not only military people and first responders, but also just civilian people that have gone through massive trauma, across the board. He's very faith forward, which is, we are at Outer Circle as well. Right. Very, very faith. And, Doc and I had a lot of conversations around faith and kind of where we are and different things. So, but, it is such a different perspective, especially for somebody in law enforcement or a first responder, because you can get shots today and be back on the job tomorrow, just as if nothing ever happened. Right.
Right. And I am really thrilled to see that trauma treatment is coming to first responders.
Yeah.
Because we do see it all the time, every shift in some way, shape, or form. And it's beneficial. We need to be on top of our game so we can protect the community and help the community. And I do believe that one of the primary differences between Dr. Lynch and Jacksonville was the open faith base.
Yeah.
Dr. Lynch doesn't hide his faith in that foundation, which was important to me. And they live that.
Yeah.
They live that life of love and compassion and kindness.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah.
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 And he and Jody are awesome.
Yeah. And you don't know it, but you were talking to Jody, his wife, when you called there, and that's and they have other people, but often we talk to Jody, and they're just great people, just all the way around.
They are.
So what's on the future for Miss Swisher, Detective Swisher? What's kind of where are you going? What's next? Where are you going?
Well, I'm back in grad school.
Okay.
So my plan there, I'll get my master's in criminal justice, public administration.
Mm-hmm.
I do hope to become a post-certified instructor.
Okay.
So maybe one day I can get out of active law enforcement and share my infinite wisdom.
There you go.
Or, BS them along until something else happens. But the best way to make God laugh.
Yes.
Tell him your plans.
Oh, yeah.
So we'll see, we'll see. That's sort of where I'm headed. I love what I'm doing now because I really like using my brain.
Yep.
And it's a totally different new aspect to law enforcement. And I think teaching will be another avenue that is new and fun. And I, without biting off more than I can chew, I do hope to be an advocate for Outer Circle Foundation because y'all are amazing. You have incredible resources. You understand and you're filling the gap that is needed. SGB for trauma is not covered by insurance, which is appalling they've been doing it for this purpose for over 30 years. Dr. Lynch is a premier front runner on the research for this. And I'm going to yell and scream from my little hilltop to anybody who will listen.
Yeah. It's interesting. We're going to DC in June to have a conversation with legislators about veterans issues. One of the things that I am going to raise with them is that's great. We have a lot of resources for veterans, but the thing that we are failing to recognize is there's upwards of 25 to 31% of our first responders are veterans or active in the Guard or Reserve. So, as we go through and we look at the different things that are available to veterans, those necessarily aren't the same things available to first responders. And somehow we got to cross that gap and really break, because I am of the opinion that, there's a ton of different things out there, right? Trauma comes from the childhood and it comes from this and it comes from that. But at the end of the day, when I took this job, you made sure that I was of sound mind, sound body, sound spirit to give me a badge and give me a gun. And I've been doing this for X number of years now. And if I got out of my car and I chased a burglary suspect and tripped over a pipe or whatever it was in the middle of the alley or something and broke my leg, I would be covered. But yet, if I come in and say, hey, I'm having an issue with X, Y, or Z, sometimes it's looked upon as, oh man, that's a mental illness, and we're going to work you out of the system as fast as we can. We're going to put you in for a fitness evaluation. We're going to do X, Y, or Z. There's a ton of different departments out there that handle it different ways, but we just need a standard to make sure that people can raise their hand, people can not have a fear of losing their job, and they can get the help they need and get right back out and do the things. We're doing it in the military. Look at everything we're doing there. There's no difference what we're doing here. We just have to kind of get our minds wrapped around it. And that's one of the things that we're going to really focus on over the course of the next couple of months. Yeah.
And that is amazing. I have always been very open about my own mental health. Yep. Because I think it's important, and I'm just a normal person. Right. I am a normal person doing a normal job that responds normally.
Yep.
And I want to be a better person. So the profession of law enforcement, and I would like to think all first responders, but law enforcement in particular, is talking all the talk about, hey, speak up, ask, take care of yourself. This is a tough job.
Mm-hmm.
And they're talking the talk, but they're not walking the walk. And I can testify to that because I've had my mental health used as a weapon against me,
mm-hmm.
Which I just kind of laugh and shake it off because that's the kind of person that I am. And I know that their ignorance and immaturity doesn't define me. But I understand why people, not everybody can be as water off the back as I am.
Yeah.
And I understand that. And a lot of people worry about what will others think. But others don't have to know.
Right.
That's the key thing. And in my therapist has lots of experience in first responders and soldiers for trauma. So I was really, really blessed when I found her. And when I come across officers or firemen, or any other first responder, I will hand her phone number out. And I will say, she is experienced in first responder trauma. I don't know if they call. I don't care.
Yeah.
I just know that I did my part, and they don't have to tell anybody. They have the information now, and hopefully if they need help, they will reach out.
Yeah.
Because my department is small. We don't have peer support.
Yeah.
I did contact Atlanta Police Department in an effort to find peer support because of what had happened with this guy coming out. I didn't get much of a response, and I don't blame that on anybody other than busyness and life and things happen.
We're going to have to get you into a reboot program, right? Reboot is that program that we have that's 12 weeks. It's peer led. So for us, Mark Jordan and I lead it now. It's 12 different weeks, 12 different topics, and it's anger versus angry. It is decisions. It's loss and grief. It's depression. There's a lot of different topics in there. And we are running our first class now with first responders. There's a first responder program, there's a military program, and then there's a program for civilians that are not law enforcement or military, but have had trauma in some way, shape, or form. And it is such a refreshing experience of watching some of the responses we're getting with our first responders in this aspect of going through, because not only do, like you mentioned, right, you have all of the trauma that you've dealt with, but then when your mental health is used against you as a weapon, that's also a moral injury as well. Look at what I've given you. Look at what I've done for this department, for the citizens, for everything. And I ask for a little bit of help, but I get this response right now, and it's flipped. Now that's the moral injury on top of the trauma that's gone on as well. And now we're compounding the issue with some things. So there's a lot of things there to kind of go through, but I would love to get you into a reboot program and have you go through and kind of get your thoughts and see what you think about it, and then potentially bring that program out to East Georgia where we can run some out there as well.
Guess what?
You're in?
Yes.
I had a feeling.
Yeah, I had a feeling that was coming.
Yeah, so I'm doing one of the online groups. That the actual group is like 300 miles away in South Georgia.
Yep.
I don't remember the exact city, but it was a city I'd never heard of before. But I am, that starts at the end of June.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the peer-to-peer stuff I just adore, and I guess it started with AA when I got sober. Yeah. That's all peer-to-peer stuff. And I like helping people, whether they listen to what I say or not. That's on them, because it might not always be good either. But I am excited to hear about this. And I will say that I have another friend who is a licensed something over in Alabama. I don't know the difference between therapists or social workers or counselors or all of that, but she's like not a doctor, but the next best thing.
Yep.
And I sent her the reboot website, and I said, go look at this. And this particular friend, she was the leader for my church in Alabama when we started Celebrate Recovery, mm-hmm. which is, they talk about recovery and people tend to go to drugs and alcohol, but this is a faith-based program that's based on the Beatitudes.
Yep.
For anybody who has a hurt, habit, or hang-up.
Yep.
If you have something that you're dealing with, Celebrate Recovery is great. And I look at Reboot as a similar program that is targeted for trauma specifically.
And it's built on biblical principles, right?
Right.
So, yeah, the whole thing is biblically based. And that's the first thing that we did, right? We found out about it a year and a half ago up in Knoxville at a conference we went to. And I came back and I called Brian and I said, hey, dude, take a look at this. And he goes, all right, who founded it and where is it? And I said, let me get you their information. And he sat down, and the woman who made it is a psychologist, just like Brian is. They've had 5 different peer-reviewed articles that have been done. And he called me back and goes, dude, solid program, great research, and it's built on biblical principles. There's not a lot of them out there like that. And he goes, I like it. And now we're rolling it out. So, it's always one of the things that we do before we look at anything is let's run it through the scientific base and the database being data driven information. Did it work? Did it not work? Where is it? And that's where Brian comes in the AIM Center is, how is it? Yes, it's great. It's a good program. So there's another one that I want to connect you with. It's called Peer Connect. Peer Connect connects to your CAD system, and based on the call that you get, you would give 10 different people that you would want to talk about anything in the world about, right? Whatever that is, whoever those people are. And you might not have 10, you might have 5, right? But whoever they are, if you go on a call, and I'm just making this up, let's say it's a death of a baby, let's say it's a homicide, let's say it's a domestic violence where somebody was seriously injured, it's an accident with more than one person dead or something like that, right? Whoever the department is figures out what these calls are along with the organization. And then if that happens, a ping goes out to your people and it says, Mary just had a call. Somebody check in on Mary. So the research has shown you, Mary, are not going to pick up the phone and call somebody and say, hey, I need to talk to somebody. Yeah. But if somebody calls you, you will answer the phone and say, hey, what's going on? And you will have a talk with that person because they reached out to you. Mm-hmm. And that's what the data says. So out of this, if Buff and I were 1 and 2 and these people were 3, 4, and 5, if I called you, it would go out to the others that says taken care of, don't need to worry about it. And they don't say who because they don't want it to be a competition between your 5. If somebody took it and you're good, right? And it's been handled. So we are bringing this. They're currently in about 600 first responder agencies around the United States. We're going to be the conduit that's going to bring it into the military. But I think it would be a good thing because you don't have peer support at Stone Mountain. This may be that conduit to help you as an agency figure out what does it look like. Yeah. And Kevin lives right there. He's from Stone Mountain. That's where he is, and he's the founder of the program. So and you're right in his backyard, which is fantastic. That's
awesome.
Yeah.
I do know that in Reboot, the only one on the east side is in Snellville. And Snellville is close enough, that I could go in person, but it's not, the Reboot schedule operates on the leader and their schedule. So it's not like every 3rd month we're going to have a new class starting.
Yeah. Right.
So not knowing when the next Snellville one would be, I went ahead and got enrolled. And I talked with Scott at Reboot, about possibly working into hosting or leading, whatever.
That's good. And the fall, they're going to come out with a 3-day as opposed to 12 weeks, which is really, really difficult to get everybody's schedule in order. So a 3-day, just take 3 days off and we'll be here and we'll work hard, but we'll get through the program in 3 days as opposed to 12 weeks. Much easier from a first responder perspective.
At the gala, a gentleman named James was at my table, and he was a fireman, and he had done the 3-day course. So we were talking about that at dinner.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yes. Yep. So there's a lot of opportunity out there.
We'll keep connected.
Yeah. So we'll stay connected, and we'll keep figuring it out. And that's the quest of what we do is stay up on the latest things out there and the good research and the good data and the good programs that are going to help everybody kind of
continue to life.
Yeah, continue to life. Yeah, that's a good way. I was going to say to deal with. That's not the best. It's not what we are. It's to continue to life, right? And be there for each other. So parting words to any first responder out there, any veteran out there, anybody out there who's dealing with something, doesn't know where to go, doesn't know what to do, kind of what's your 2 cents for them? What's your words of wisdom, words of encouragement?
I would say keep asking.
Mhm.
Because just like with the SGB, I kept asking and I kept asking and I kept looking and, I kept hitting so many walls that nobody knew anything. And just by the tenacity, God opened that door and led me straight to y'all who had that information and helped me get to where I needed to go. So that might not be the answer for everybody, but the answer is out there so you can have a quality of life again.
Mm-hmm.
And you just have to keep asking. Just don't take no. Don't take, I don't know, don't take the apathy of administration.
Yeah.
Just, you are your best advocate. And there are organizations like Outer Circle Foundation that will help you find and get the resources that you need. Just keep asking.
Beautiful.
Hey.
No, I'm good.
You were very quiet this whole.
That's okay. Sometimes it's okay because sometimes when it's more for you, then you're very quiet.
I am.
Well, and when you have like talkative women, we can't all talk at once.
That's right. We can't.
She will have her window.
You could. Oh, I trust me. Trust me. That would be a show to. Yeah.
Pop popcorn.
Yeah, exactly. Be in the front.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, Mary Swisher, we thank you so much. We are so honored that we were able to meet, that you are continuing to be part of the Outer Circle family, and we will forever be connected at the hip as we always are with those that we help and we're there.
Absolutely. It's y'all have been such a blessing. And through you and Outer Circle, I've met other great people, and that's just going to keep going. We're just going to keep meeting more zillions of amazing, awesome people because we're out there. We just have to find each other.
Yep.
We will.
For sure. Okay, so hey everyone, welcome to the Chicken Dude and Stuff. Right? Did I get that right?
No.
No, I didn't get it right. So what is it?
Chicken Dude Stuff.
Oh, Chicken Dude Stuff. Chicken Dude and Stuff. It's Chicken Dude and Bag of Stuff.
Oh.
That's our podcast.